Okay, good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me today. And I would like to speak about indigenous cultures. So, first of all, we should understand who are indigenous peoples, and this is the definition which would suit all indigenous peoples of the world. Which says these are ethnic groups who are original settlers of a given region, in contrast to groups that have settled, occupied, or colonized the area more recently. As we will see today, all those peoples have some similar problems, but today I would like to concentrate mostly on culture and languages, and you will also understand why. So, again, if we look at all indigenous peoples on our planet in general, we will see that they are very diverse. And there are at least 370 million people on all the continents, in all the areas. They live in about 90 countries, and they occupy about 22% of land. So, but a very interesting fact that about 70% of them live in Asia. So Asia is the most diverse region on our planet, if we may say so. The thing is that in most countries where they live, they are a minority, but this is not always so, because in some Latin American countries, like Bolivia, for example, they are about half of the population, or even sometimes more, and this is historical. So, in all other countries, they are a minority. In Russia, we also have a lot of those peoples, and we have a special definition here. You can see it, and I would like to pay your attention to the most important aspects. In Russia, we call them indigenous small-numbered peoples of the Russian Federation. In Russian, this would be коренные малочисленные народы, and they're called small-numbered because they do not exceed 50,000 people. So they should occupy the traditional territory first. They should continue doing their traditional practicing their traditional lifestyle, economy, trades. So also understand and see themselves as an ethnic entity. So then they are called those indigenous small-numbered peoples of the Russian Federation. And there is also part taken from the federal law, which says that the traditional life of indigenous peoples is the strategy of survival, which has been developed throughout their history based on the experience of their forefathers in nature management, original social structure, accommodation, original culture, and the preservation of customs and beliefs. Let's have a look a bit closer at our indigenous peoples. So I said there are many of them. In fact, not so many compared to the whole world population, of course. So there are only 47 peoples, according to the latest census, and they constitute only 0.3% of the population of our country. And compared to the world, you can see it's not so many. It's about 500,000 people. And you can also see the biggest people, which are the Nenets, and there are 41,000 people there, and the smallest, the Karaks, with just 4 people. So can you see the difference? And sometimes, and this is also one of the biggest problems of all indigenous peoples, that they lose their traditions, they lose their languages, and why? Because people just die out.
Population.
Yes. So sometimes in some areas we have such indigenous populations which have just 1, 2, 3 people, and often they are very old already, and there are new generations. The new generations are not coming, so we cannot just continue those traditions. But I should also mention that when we speak about Russia, for example, we should also understand that, let's say, Russians are also an indigenous population of Russia. But we call small-numbered peoples the ones which are, let me just remind you, fewer than 50,000 people. But, for example, the Komi and the Yakuts, they are also indigenous, but they are more than 400,000 people. So we should also not forget about them. If you look at the map of the Russian Federation, you can see here how they are located, and you can also see that most of the territory is inhabited by them. Well, of course, they are scattered all around, but still they're always there. And today we celebrate one of the things that the United Nations decided to do to draw people's attention to the problems of indigenous populations. And this year, 2019, is the year of the International Year of Indigenous Languages. But there were also some other steps before. So, for example, there were 2 decades of the world's indigenous peoples, which were from 1995 to 2004, and then the next one. There is also a special United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which has been working since 2000. Then there was a special declaration on rights of indigenous peoples, which was taken only in 2007, so just very few years ago. And since 2004, there is a special holiday, international holiday, on the 9th of August, which celebrates the indigenous cultures, the indigenous peoples of the world. And this is especially marked by them, but also by the majority population as well. We also have some special holidays in Russia, and one of them is, one of the biggest ones, is celebrated in Murmansk on the last Sunday of January since 1969. This is called Hello Sun, and this holiday means the end of the polar night, which is very long, and the returning of the sun, which is really a big event at that region. That's why this is celebrated by the northern people of Russia. Now let's have a look at some of the aspects which unite all the indigenous peoples of the world. And of course, this is colonization. So as I said before, they occupy their traditional lands, but not always so. Colonization began all over the world by different countries on different continents. It began in the 15th century, and it still continued even in the 20th century. So we should not think that this is something of really distant past. And probably American Indians, the ones who live in North America, suffered the most because, let's say, in Russia, our indigenous people still managed to live mostly on their lands. But American Indians were removed and placed to reservations, and they had to abandon their lands, which was a very painful process. And of course, as you understand, colonization also caused a lot of other different situations. So they all have their distinct languages, cultures, traditions, and beliefs, of course, ritual practices, meaning ceremonies, rites. Then they are all very closely connected with nature. Nature plays a very important role in their life, and they all have traditional economic activities. For example, some of these activities among the Russian peoples, the Russian indigenous peoples, are reindeer breeding, sea hunting. They hunt whales, walruses, seals, hunting, trapping, fishing, and gathering wild plants. So these are the most important ones. And speaking about hunting and fishing and sea hunting, we should also understand that there are a lot of restrictions in all the world. For example, there are some laws which prohibit hunting to all people, but specifically for the indigenous population, these laws allow that, because this is one of the basic things how they provide for themselves. This is just for food, not for some commercial purposes. Then let's have a look at the languages, because we are in this year of the world's indigenous languages, and maybe sounds like a very big figure, but it's not so big. There are about 7,000 spoken languages in the world today, and of course before there were many more. Most of them are spoken by exactly indigenous peoples, because each of them has a separate language, and about 90% of all those 7,000 will die out in the nearest 100 years. So that's a very sad statistics. And if you look at the map, you will see those hotspots, language hotspots, and they show the languages which are very close to extinction. For example, the dark red, exactly also in Russia, for the Russian indigenous populations, they are among the first to become extinct. That's really sad. Also, if you look at the quote on the top, it says 1 indigenous language dies every 2 weeks. Sounds really scary. But at the same time, if you have a look just at the diversity of them, in Africa, in Australia, South America, North America, Russia, so everywhere, all over the world, just see how many different colors there are. So, and each of them is really precious. Many governments support the study of these languages, and they also initiate special programs. These programs usually aim at collecting information, writing grammar books, recording the audio, the alphabet, the different dictionaries and so on, but there is still the problem of spoken language, because to know the language properly you can just hardly learn it like Latin from books. It will be not a living language. For that you need younger generations which will study these languages and speak them, which is not always the case. And now I would like us to have a look at something a bit different, and as we are speaking about cultures, at some aspect which is probably the most important for all indigenous population. This is religious beliefs. And this map represents different religions of the world. So this violet color shows indigenous religions. Again, you can see that there are many of them in South America, in North America, in Africa, almost half of the continent. Look how many in Russia. Yeah. And in Australia, almost again, in every part of the world. So if we combine and compare them, some people say that they can make altogether the 6th biggest religion in the world, just by numbers. And what are the common elements of those religious beliefs of indigenous peoples? First of all, of course, this is animism. Animism is the belief that all, well, I wanted to say all living beings, in fact, everything is considered as a living being, and everything has a soul, everything is animated. That's why this is animism. And from here, we have some special attitude to all those creatures. Especially, I didn't want to put animals, because this is everyone. Birds, fish, insects, just everyone. And even in mythology, they are called peoples also. So they are not, for example, the bear or the tiger or something else. Even the insects, they are not the ants, they are the ants people. And it shows this kinship, this relation, this very important attitude to them. From the belief in spirits, so that everything has a spirit or soul, in other words, well, in fact, these are a bit different things, but now we're not going to discuss this, goes shamanism. And shamans, well, they are called a bit differently again in different populations, in different peoples. But still, they exist almost everywhere. And they are the ones who communicate, who are considered to communicate with the spirits and thus help their societies. The main aim of the shaman or medicine man or some special person who does that is to help the society, to heal, to perform different ceremonies, to sometimes even heal something which was considered incurable by the European medicine. And there were cases like that when, if I'm not mistaken, in the 17th or 18th century, I don't remember exactly now, there were cases when North American or American Indian medicine man could heal some of the diseases which could not be healed by the European doctors in Europe at that time.
With the help of spirits?
Well, different practices that they do, and they take to everything. So it can be plants, it can be spirits, it can be some special physical manipulations and so on. So a lot of them. Then, of course, if everything is animated, we have this special attitude to nature. Nature should be preserved. Nature is the place where we live. And in fact, it's not just the place where we live, but where we came from originally. We have Mother Earth, we have Father Sky, we have all those relatives all around us in nature. That's why we should always take care of it and have and share this sense of responsibility, which all indigenous peoples have. They feel responsible for maintaining balance and harmony and sustainability. So if they, some of them even believe that if they do not do that, who else?
Nobody.
Yes, nobody, because they see what's happening to the world today when ecology is getting down and worse, wars, different, many different ecological problems, and they just do their best because they feel responsible for, well, it may sound a bit pathetic, but still, I think it really deserves respect that they would really love to do something to save the humanity. And of course, again, this is connected, all those things are interconnected. If we believe in spirits, in soul, if we respect everything and everyone which surrounds us, then we should also always respect our elders and our ancestors. Some African tribe believes, and I really love this belief, that people don't die, they just live in our souls until we remember them. So they die when we forget them. So I think it's something we should all learn from indigenous peoples. Then, mythologies, of course, they all have beautiful, really interesting, sometimes similar, sometimes quite different mythologies. And all these mythologies are passed from generation to generation through oral tradition. Oral tradition is something really important, and that's also why the word is very valued, because the art of storytellers, and storytellers exist in almost any tribe, in almost any nation, I mean the indigenous population. They are among the most respected people, and they keep all this knowledge and have it passed to the younger generations and let it continue. Rituals and ceremonies are rooted in mythology. So they, again, some scholars believe that, it really looks like true, that all religions were born from mythology, so that mythology was the basis of religion, because it was the first attempt to explain the world around us. So how everything appeared, who created it, and so on, so on. Cosmogony, every tribe, every nation has its own cosmogony, which means how the world came into being. How all our planets, the sun, the moon appeared later than humans, and all the rest. And almost every tribe has origin myths, how they originated. And this is a bit interesting. Let me just jump a bit down. I'll get back to the previous one in a second. Most of indigenous peoples believe that they were born in the center, or they somehow appeared, and the ways how they appeared are different, but the idea is there that they appeared in the center of the world. So they live in the center of the world. That's also why this center should be preserved, cared for, and they are responsible for the balance there, because from that center the harmony of the whole world depends. And as this is the center of the world and they appeared there, they are somehow special. They are somehow unique, what we call chosen people. Again, we should not see it as some kind of selfishness or something. This is absolutely normal, that most peoples believe that they are special. And this is how they manage to preserve their traditions, because they know that it's worth it. They all have horizontal and vertical pictures of the world. If someone heard my presentation the previous time, I explained a bit more about it. But now, in short, the horizontal picture of the world, these are the cardinal directions. So 4 cardinal directions. From here we get different sacred numbers, or which are considered sacred by us. They are not called so there. So north, south, east, west. Sometimes also the center is considered. And the vertical picture of the world, this is what we call the heavens, or the upper world, our world, the present one, and the underworld. Sometimes they're also associated with the ideas where the soul goes after death. So also a number of worlds. It's not just those 3 worlds. This is where we have the present picture, where we live right now. But what is meant here is that our world is not the first one. So before there were some other worlds. And for different reasons, and one of the reasons was because people were doing something bad. So they were either sinful or they committed some crimes, they misbehaved. That's why they were punished and the world was destroyed. So now we have survived to the next world. It's also in our hands to continue this world or to have another cycle, but with other people. I would like to pay your attention to this picture here. This is a painting by Australian Aboriginal artists, and this style of painting is called Dreamtime painting. In Russian we call it точечная живопись, because it's painted with small dots. And Dreamtime, just listen to the word Dreamtime, isn't it beautiful? But it's not about dreams. The dream here is some kind of dream all the world was in before our universe appeared. So how everything existed even before it appeared, and then how it appeared. And the idea of rituals, and here the idea of paintings also, and different ceremonies, is to represent the story of creation, and by representing it again, we live it again, and we help our world renew and revive. Cyclicality is the main feature of all mythologies in general, and it's also the idea which is closely rooted in nature. Because if we look at nature, of course, everything is cyclical. So seasons change, water goes in cycles, our blood in our bodies goes in cycles. So everything is seen as a cycle. That's also why many ceremonies are calendar. They are related to different dates in the periods in the calendar. They are repeated every year, and they are also conducted just to help the world continuing. Our life is also considered as a cycle. So it's not that we die when we die, I mean physically, it's that we continue our cycle in a different world, depending on the people, they believe different continuations. And then after that, we are again reborn. So we continue the cycle again. It means that cycles can continue, but not forever. So sometimes they can come an end to them. Then from those cycles comes dualism, because if we look at the cycle, for example, our life here in this world on top and our life between death and rebirth, they are on different parts, on the opposite parts. Again, people observed those changes of seasons like winter and summer, or hot and cold, and so on. And they came to the conclusion that everything in the world has its counterpart. So we have those dualities in the world. It doesn't mean that everything is either black or white. And in fact, according to indigenous philosophers, even what we would call black is not really bad, because we cannot live without that. We cannot have only the light side and only happiness and only the good one, because we will not know that this is good. We need both, but the main idea is to keep them in balance. So if we have them in balance, then evil will not conquer the good. And also rooted in mythology is sacred geometry. As I said, it's really difficult to somehow put them apart, because they are all intermingled. Sacred geometry is the alienation of different structures, like you see those pyramids in Mexico, or the sacred kiva from North American Indians, the Pueblos. So they are alienated to the sun, where it rises, where it sets, on solstices and equinoxes. Some of them are alienated to the movement of the moon, of the stars. They have those sacred, that's why it's geometry, sacred forms. For example, here we have a circle, which is, because of cyclicality, this is one of the most sacred symbols and figures. And we can see it all over the world. We're speaking about indigenous peoples, but if we look at even present-day architecture, we can also sometimes see some of those things there. And of course, as they live on their traditional lands, these lands are sacred lands and sacred sites. That's also why it's really difficult for those peoples to be forced to move to some other place, because everything, every small living thing, be it a river, a bush, a mountain, or something else, it has some meaning. It has those spirits, it has this, those living forces which people get from there. And for example, we have this famous Devil's Tower in Wyoming, sacred for American Indians, or Uluru Mountain in Australia, sacred for Australian Aboriginals. So that's also why sometimes we, when we read some news or hear some news about another fight between the native population or indigenous population and the governments which want to move them somehow or put, let's say, something through their lands, we just think, okay, they just want that land. It's not just that they want to possess it, and they themselves say you cannot possess the land. It's not something you can have. You can just kindly use it, and it will give something back. And these are probably, this is of course a very brief explanation what indigenous cultures have in common. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer you, or you can always contact me by email. I just would like to attract your attention to this very moment, that there are many, many indigenous peoples in the world. They are endangered, but if they disappear, we will lose a big part of culture, of languages, of traditions, and we will lose a bit part of ourselves. So I hope this doesn't happen. Thank you.
So